Welcome to Let's Talk About, brought to you by the Business and IP Centre North East and the British Library. In this series, we want to showcase the people behind the Business and IP Centre North East, which includes our expert-in-residence, library staff, our BIPC locals, as well as featuring local businesses who have benefited from using our services. Hello, so nice to see you both. I'm really delighted to be joined by Tracy and also Karen today. We're going to talk about retail, why it matters and why retail is detail. So it would be great to hear a bit about yourselves and your background for anyone listening or watching. So we'll start with you, Tracy.
Hello. First of all, isn't this great? Lovely to be here and to have the opportunity to talk about what I do with BIPC North East, and accompanied by my lovely colleague, Karen, who's also one of the experts. I think I can probably speak on behalf of all of the experts here where I say we're all interested in finding out what businesses do and what problems and issues they come across and how we can help them. My role within BIPC North East is entitled Survive and Thrive. Now, what I'd like to say first of all is behind every business there is a brilliant business person or people, and they all have an adventurous spirit. What I do is I work with that adventurous spirit, and through some inspiration, some motivation, some cajoling, some transformation, I work with them to understand what their challenges and barriers are. I try to help them explore what the opportunities and solutions might be. And together we find a way forward where they can understand some clarity of direction and the solutions that are presented to them, because I do believe every challenge is just missing a solution. So that's what I do.
Sounds exciting. And I can't wait to get stuck into some of the challenges that small businesses face. So thank you so much for sharing. And what about you, Karen?
So my role in my own business is delivering differently. It stemmed really from a long background of retail. So 30 odd years, too many. I know I don't look old enough, but too many to explore the brands that I've worked with, and also to make sure that I can bring that out with the BIPC clients around retail, so that I can help and support them to grow a efficient, profitable commercial business that allows them to be really happy in their role, whether that be startup, whether it be transformation, or ultimately whether that might be growth.
Perfect. Thank you. So I would like to know, why is retail important? What shifts are we seeing at the moment?
I can honestly say from a personal perspective that what I've missed with retail, especially during lockdown, was that kind of smell and touch and feel and the physical, and the smile when you go into a retail premises. And I think putting everything online has seen some successes. We have seen some great successes from that, but we've also seen some casualties. And I think retail's changed massively. If you think about sort of, the onset of digital and, Facebook in 2004 and the iPhone in 2008, it's changed the way consumers buy. It's changed the whole buyer behaviour. And I do think from a personal perspective, I couldn't wait to get back in the shops. And I think there was also this kind of feeling, I don't know how you felt, Karen, that there was a lot of support for the small communities, for the smaller businesses. And there was lots of people sort of putting together directories of local businesses that you could buy from, so you could support your local community. I think it is sad that we've lost some of that on the high street. But this is about sort of adapting to how sort of consumers want to buy now. And I can talk for a week on that, but I'll pause it there.
I think it's really interesting as well, isn't it? Over those 30 odd years that I've been in retail, you know, even before sort of in our grandparents' days, it was very much about local shopping. And we seem to have gone really sort of full circle as a result of this pandemic. But interesting as well, you know, I've been a retailer all the way through the onset of online shopping. The situation that we currently have around supply chain is causing significant problems for very big brands, for very big retailers, but also for your smaller businesses that are ultimately reliant on getting that product through at the time that they intended it to be a part of their, say, visual merchandising campaign or a promotion. And ultimately, they're having to be quick on their feet, strategic, and change those plans at generally quite a bit of a sort of drop of the hat in order to be reactive. And that proactive behavior that people were, particularly those big brands. So you mentioned, you know, some of the retailers we've lost. I mean, Debenhams. I could see Debenhams on the cards for quite a while. They'd lost to my mind, they'd lost their customer. It was everything to everybody. And, you know, you didn't buy from Debenhams unless you had a Blue Cross event on, or they were in sale, or they were in promotion. And certainly in my background at Clark's, we saw a real shift, and we really started to strategically plan differently around the promotional activity. Customers were starting to be reliant on that promotional activity and wouldn't shop outside of it. So you would see significant falls in trade levels. Our Monday meetings, as an example, which is reviewing all of the management accounts, all of the KPIs, all of the information that we would have available to us. Unless we were in promotion, you would see the footfall significantly decline. You would see the stores' individual trade decline. But of course, what you then don't see is the labour or the wages, the payroll decline at the same rate. So it really does put those big brands under pressure. And so therefore, for me, it really wasn't a big surprise that Debenhams was falling away. But, you know, you then start to look at Marks and Spencer's now. Marks and Spencer's, as a result of the pandemic, have really taken the opportunity to bring in other brands. That's to help their supply chain, so they don't have to buy all of their own product. They're using other brands to fill the square footage, and ultimately then to start to become a department store alongside Next. And I think what we're going to start to see are some of these big brands almost diversifying individually, but it's going to become very blanket approach.
It's also that consumer trend, well, from a consumer point of view, looking at, you know, your giants like Debenhams that you've shopped at for years, you trust, you love to go to, it feels like a place you've always been able to go and buy from, and then all of a sudden there isn't that giant, you know, brand that you, and it's completely gone. And I think we've seen this with groups like WH Smith. Actually, I was more thinking of HMV, the music store. You know, there's just been so many things over the years that you've watched, you know, all these changes on the high street, and there is that concept, you know, that the high street is dead, which I don't agree with at all. And then I think it's so nice to see a lot of independent businesses as well claiming that back.
HMV is a really interesting one because they're getting a resurgence as a change in the way that trends. So, you know, trends really do play a major role in these major retailers. But HMV was literally at the point of closure. And then we're starting to see a lot of vinyl again, and people are buying what I would call a record player, and really starting to mix on decks at home. And people are really using that as a sort of hobby, and therefore you're seeing that trend come through. So they're really starting to improve. But WH Smith's is a really great example of where you have the newspaper industry dying on its feet and WH Smith having to diversify, which does play into your area, Tracy.
Yeah, it does. I think personalisation comes with its own set of opportunities. So for smaller businesses, getting to know the customer And but collecting the data that they need to get to know that customer comes with sort of permissions. So we're getting into, you know, everything. A smaller business might use sort of loyalty cards, might use email newsletters, might have cookies on their website, but they need to understand their customer so much more than that, so they can personalize their offer. And I do think for the smaller businesses, it does give them an opportunity to really sort of understand not necessarily the next sale, but the next action that the customer is going to take. So there is a bit of work to be done. And especially for smaller businesses, I think sometimes there is a fear of technology. Sometimes, you know, they don't know what they need to do. They don't know which platforms they need to use. And I think this isn't taken away from the physical premises, and this certainly isn't taken away from the actual practical things that they need to do in their stores. But it's in addition to, so it's a multi-channel approach that they need to be thinking of.
It's that resistance to change for them.
It is.
I can remember in Clark's that the franchise estate significantly held back and fought against the brand. And this would be probably about 2010 onwards, I'm trying to remember. But really, they fought against going online. It was all about bricks and mortar. And in my role and some of the things that I've done with the BIPC, there was a lady. Am I right to move into talking about?
Absolutely.
Is that okay? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lady that I helped recently who had bought an online business, and during the pandemic, and she felt that she really wanted to move that into the retail bricks and mortar, into a sort of shop retail presence. And what was really interesting during that sort of hour conversation that I had with her and offering her that level of support was that actually she decided that that was not for her.
Right.
So she wanted to make the change. Her friends and her family were absolutely behind, saying to her that you should be doing this. It would be great. You've got all this stock. You wouldn't need to buy anything. It would be amazing to have this retail premises. And when she actually stopped and talked it through with somebody much more impartial, with some retail knowledge and some experience, I think what she really understood then was how it was going to impact her personal life. What things it was going to absolutely make those differences, and how it would affect not only her business, but what she wanted in the long term. So the result of that conversation was actually protecting her from making a bad decision rather than making the best decision. So the result was the best decision for her, but it might not have been the same for everybody. And I think that's where Tracy and I really add some value in the BIPC role to support small businesses to make the right decisions and understand what is the priority is going to be in the future, continuing to use those experts to really help and support.
And I think what they don't realise when they're kind of going through this exercise, especially when we're talking about bricks and mortar, is that the buck stops here. So if the alarm goes off in the middle of the night, or, you know, they need someone to staff the premises and their staff are off sick, there's all those fixed costs that they don't think about. It sounds like a dream to have a lovely premises. They might not think, as you mentioned before, Karen, about parking, about, you know, what's around, what the footfall's like. So a mix of both is really good. But what comes out in a lot of my conversations is the amount of hats that a small business has to wear and the amount of things that they have to do. So, you know, not only do they become sort of guardian of their own empire and their own sort of bricks and mortar shop, but their social media specialists, their HR, their finance, their, you know, their customer service, their marketing, their everything. And sometimes spinning those plates, especially when you're managing online and offline, is quite a challenge.
Absolutely. I really connect with what you're saying there, particularly about premises, because if you have a premises, you also have business rates to think about. You've got your electricity, rising fuel bills. You also have staff. And as you mentioned there, Tracy, you've actually got to juggle the online and offline. So all of a sudden, if you were, say, a small independent shop working from home, e-commerce site, something like that, where you sell online or via Facebook Marketplace or however it might work, you can move a lot faster because you can also market and list your activities and what you're doing. But once you have a space, you also have to clean that space. You know, you have to make sure people can access it. If someone,
so important.
it really is.
Standards are so
Absolutely.
important.
And you know, things like, you know, councils or local authorities might have hygiene standards that you have to meet, or, you know, what if somebody faints in your store, or there's all of these insurance risks that come in. And I think having somebody that you can go and ask those questions, because, you know, how many people who might be listening or watching think those things through, you know, and it's knowing what to ask.
Yeah, and I think sometimes you don't know what you don't know, and what Karen said is, you know, this is right for the individual, and you know, the questioning around what the motivation is behind having this sort of shop premises, especially if you have started online, because whatever you choose to do, whether you like it or not, impacts on those around you. So, you know, whether you're sort of doing your spreadsheets for stock sort of late at night, or you're juggling a small child on your knee while you're trying to do your accounts, you know, all these things impact on those people around you. So having an impartial ear, not someone in your family and not your friends, has great value.
I think this is an important bit around concessions. So having those pop-up shops, you know, the bits that we talked about, like in not WH Smith, although they're very good actually with having the post office in-house, and the travel bureaus and things like that. But pop-up stands, or, you know, you see this in Phoenix or some of the department stores where you'll have All Saints and other stores having a concession. And this is something I found really interesting. So watching stores like Next taking on Lipsy as a brand, or, you know, having those pop-up places where there is a smaller concession, they pay for rent in that bigger store. It gives the store credibility, it gives them, you know, diversification, but at the same time it limits some of those risks that we were talking about there, because they've got the protection of a bigger brand. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on pop-up stores, or, you know, even if it's just for, say, a weekend or a week, where retailers or brands can actually get some sales, get a bit of a boost, maybe for Mother's Day, or in partnership with a group, but they're not committing to the long-term costs.
Yeah, and I think it's not sometimes just the bigger brands that can help them with that. I'm seeing a lot of trends in smaller businesses kind of collaborating together and taking on a space. And there are some initiatives out there that can help them do that. So, you know, some areas of the Metro Centre will allow you to do that. Some areas of sort of Gateshead will allow you to do that. So there are initiatives where smaller businesses are actually working together, or even a small business yourself. You know, you might not even think that your local hairdressers or your local beauty therapist might want to have your jewellery or your hats or your, you know, whatever it is that you're selling. So that type of collaboration works really well on a smaller scale as well.
I think there is a real opportunity for both local and central government to make a big impact in this area. So there is some recent legislation around them having to provide and use some of that space. And I personally would love to be involved in really trying to set the trend on this. There are so many small businesses that really could do with that help and support to get them into that retail space and understand from not only the sales that they make, so which products are working best for them, therefore which ones are their best sellers, which ones should they get money behind, where should their supply chain come from, what do their margins look like, what is their overall central cost base. But having that, whether it be for a weekend or whether that be for a slightly longer period of time, would be so beneficial. And for me, things around the Granger market.
Yeah.
The Granger market in Newcastle is such a special place, not only because of its heritage, but because you can take a very small unit, you can make that work. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to do something about making that a much more advertised space, both from a small independent retailer, but equally for, you know, a sort of a tourism attraction, you know, something with a point of difference in the local area, I think would be amazing. So I do think there is a real opportunity, and pop-up shops is a great way of people being able to understand, have they done the research that they needed to do before they commit to a 3 or 5 year lease, which is significantly going to cost them.
Absolutely. I'm thinking of a particular colleague that I work with at the moment who took on a space in the stack, and actually so the stack, for anyone listening or watching, is it was a pop-up space that people could hire and rent and do retail, and they sold alcohol, so they made their own whiskey and gin and things like this. But actually, being in a small space for 3 to 6 months, they didn't really think about the footfall. So it's a very busy area, and they thought they would have so many sales. But actually, being away from market stalls where they might make £1,500 a day, and being in a space that's off the street, and also, you know, the space actually was serving alcohol as well. So you're not going to have much advertising or promotion when you're in direct competition with the bar that's there. So they just didn't get the footfall or the financial, the sales that they were expecting. It's such a valuable lesson that sometimes the market is the best place to be. I mean, are you seeing any trends around face-to-face interactions that you'd like to share? So, for instance, I was walking down the street the other day and we spoke about elderly relatives or grandparents earlier. So there was a gent, I walked to work. He was maybe in his 70s in a suit at 7 a.m. And I thought it was so sweet. And he had his shopping bags and he was walking along to go to Morrison's and do his errands on Shields Road and Biker. And I just thought, oh my gosh, he's so dressed up for the day. It's 7 a.m. and he's out about doing his things. And I was thinking to myself, how many people, for instance, through the pandemic, have not had the opportunity to talk to someone, to engage with someone. So touch points and customer service and that in retail. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
I think what a lot of retailers it's important for them to understand the touch points of different customer groups. And there are a lot of buyers, if I can call them that are excluded. So it's not all about, having everyone, who follows your Facebook or your Instagram stories, because not everyone engages with that. But it also does depend on who your target market is. So there are some stores out there that do serve a specific generation or a specific type of individual, and understanding their needs as much as sort of different customer group needs. So someone who is a young mum with a baby might have a completely different need to this gentleman that you're talking about. I get it all the time from my mum, so I'm constantly reminded all the time, they forget about us. I think it's that mix, and I think it's about choosing your channels very carefully. So it might not all be about, do you have a YouTube channel? Do you have a Facebook page? Do you have an Instagram page? It might be about, do you print some leaflets? Do you actually put some, leaflets through people's doors? What is it that you're trying to say to them, and how are you trying to reach them? But more importantly, what is it that you want them to do when they get that information? Do you want them to visit your shop? Do you want them to sign up to your Facebook page? Do you want them to, sign up to your newsletter on your website? So all of these things, because there are some members, shall I say, of the older generation, I'm frightened to use that word because my mum will kill me, who she's, she can do FaceTime. So there are some members who can use some of these digital tools. So it's understanding where your audience is and which platforms they might use, and then sort of integrating that into your marketing strategy and your marketing plan.
For me as well, building on that, Tracy, I think there's a real piece around what do you do with the customer when they actually arrive either at your website or, very importantly, when they arrive in your store. So when you are face-to-face with a customer, and certainly because labour costs are continuing to rise, we all know that national minimum wage, rose recently. And as a result of that, that is putting a really big pressure, excuse me, on, the finances within the business. So what people are tending to do is keep the staffing very tight, which of course has a knock-on impact to the service level that you actually then provide to the customer. And I think, certainly we talked at the beginning about, local shopping and keeping it local and seeing that real transition from the pandemic. That is still evolving, but I'm of a firm belief that will only happen until the point where people either don't get the product that they want locally, they then will decide that they will go elsewhere, they might move back into the city. But equally, if the service that they are expecting from that smaller retailer, whether that be an independent or a multinational, isn't at the service level that they expect to hand over their money, then it will go somewhere else. So I think the service level that people consider as being part of their business strategy or their business proposition at the very beginning is indicative of the success that they will have in that targeted market area.
Absolutely. Service and customer service and the journey is so important. And I'm really, delighted to hear about some of the ways that you help your clients through the BIPC. Before we finish, if you could share your one top tip for anyone starting out in retail. So if we go with you, Tracy, first, and then we'll get you, Karen, and then we'll wrap up because what an amazing topic. I could talk about it all day.
Starting in retail, I think it's very important to understand sort of what's your reason for doing this. I'm sure lots of startup advisors will say, what's the why? What's your motivation? Because it is a roller coaster ride, not necessarily just retail, but being in business. You have your ups and you have your downs. And I do think that you need to understand what that motivation is, so you keep coming back to that to keep you going when it gets a little bit tough.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Karen?
I guess for me, there's understand absolutely what Tracy says, your why, but for me, it's about understanding what is your product. Is there a market for that product? Because if you don't do your research, and side subject, but the BIPC can massively help with understanding that research piece. Is there a market for what you are trying to do? Because nobody wants to put their heart, their soul, their lifeblood into that business to find that it doesn't work. It's not going to be successful, because that's just going to, remove somebody's personal value and just make them feel really quite uncomfortable and awkward. So really do your research, really make sure that you have understood what your product is and is there a market for it. And if you are to go into bricks and mortar and you are short of cash, my suggestion would be go online first. If you have some money, wherever you spend it, make sure you spend it in the place that has the biggest driver of footfall, so that you absolutely can make the most of those customers and truly understand what your next step is.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your top tips and for coming into the studio, and really lovely to chat to you.
Thanks very much, Ashleigh. Thanks, you. Great.
Ashleigh.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Use insightful databases to delve into the latest market trends and consumer behaviours. Find out about the latest funding opportunities and scope out your competition. This podcast series has been brought to you by the Business and IP Centre North East and the British Library, produced by Flamingo Heights Studio, and I've been your host, Ashleigh King. To help the show grow, subscribe and leave a rating wherever you're listening.